Welcome to the introduction of the Guilford Courthouse virtual tour. I am Ranger Jason, and I will be taking you on your virtual tour of the battlefield. But before we can go out on the battlefield, we first have to discuss how the American War of Independence ends up in the backcountry of North Carolina. And to do that, we have to compress about 6 years of war into just a few minutes. We can break down the American War of Independence into 3 major phases. The first phase occurred around Boston. In the wake of the Boston Tea Party in 1773, the British thought they could take harsh measures to make an example of the city and contain the heart of the rebellion. When actual fighting occurs at Lexington and Concord in 1775, the British Army gets surrounded in Boston. They realize the problem is much larger than anticipated, as troops from all over New England and the middle colonies come to help. And supplies from most of the North American colonies were being shipped to help Massachusetts during its occupation. In early 1776, the British are forced to evacuate Boston and plan their return, starting the second phase of the war. When they return and invade in New York, their plan was to cut off New England from the other colonies by seizing control of the Hudson Valley, with one army moving north from New York and another meeting it by coming south from Canada. A brief but failed attempt at invasion in the southern colonies was also attempted at that same time. The British score several victories in the north against the Continental Army and established New York as their new base of operations. But the American Army and Congress remain intact. Even in 1777, when the British seized what they thought was the de facto capital of the rebellion, Philadelphia, and beat Washington's army in a few more battles, they still can't crush the American ability to resist. And they aren't winning the hearts and minds of the populace either. Then, in late 1777, an entire British army is forced to surrender at Saratoga in New York, when another attempt at a British advance out of Canada was stopped. This turn of events is what shifts the war into its third phase, the southern phase. News of Saratoga was influential in bringing France into the war as a formal ally of the rebelling American colonies. With their army and navy now engaged, Great Britain now had to send more men and more ships to protect other parts of their empire, including their valuable sugar colonies in the Caribbean. This meant that there were less men and ships to employ against the rebelling 13 colonies. After the British Army abandons Philadelphia and returns to New York, several new strategies are considered, but ultimately they settle on sending troops into the South. There they hope to recruit loyalists and reclaim their most profitable colonies. In 1778, forces are sent to seize Savannah, and in 1779, they successfully defend their hold of the city from a joint Franco-American attack. Then the main invasion follows in 1780. The British sail from New York, land south of Charleston, then surround the city. By May, Charleston and the American army defending it are forced to surrender. The British then spread into the South Carolina backcountry. Now under the command of General Charles Cornwallis, they begin setting up outposts, but are opposed by partisan fighters as civil war erupts through the southern colonies. In August 1780, a new American army was sent to try and stop the British, but it was quickly destroyed at the Battle of Camden. It now seemed that the British were poised to invade North Carolina, but a defeat at the Battle of Kings Mountain destroyed the largest body of well-trained loyalists the British had in the South. When camp fever runs rampant through the ranks of the British Army soon after that, Cornwallis pulls back and plans to invade North Carolina in 1781. In December of 1780, General Nathaniel Greene arrives in the South to lead yet another American army against the British. He divides his army to make it easier to supply, but he also does this to keep Cornwallis from being able to surprise and destroy his little army all at once. In January of 1781, the British try to catch and destroy part of Greene's force under General Daniel Morgan at the Battle of Cowpens in western South Carolina. The Guilford Courthouse campaign began as soon as General Cornwallis learned of the debacle at the Battle of Cowpens. Slow movement and poor communication had led Banastre Tarleton's force to being isolated and defeated there on January 17, 1781. Now Cornwallis would launch an attack on Daniel Morgan's force while it was still separated from the rest of General Greene's army near Cheraw. Cornwallis had several objectives in launching this campaign. First, he hoped to free the prisoners he had just lost at Cowpens. Second, he still intended to intercept Morgan's force and destroy it before it could reunite with General Greene. This had been the original plan for the move towards Cowpens. Third, Failing to catch Morgan, Cornwallis wanted to either drive the American army out of North Carolina or destroy it in battle, opening the door to pacification of North Carolina. Fourth, Cornwallis wanted to recruit loyalists to aid him in his operations so he could effectively counter the rebel partisans like Thomas Sumter and Francis Marion. Loyalists could also help ease the burden on Cornwallis's regulars who were becoming stretched out in the South. Cornwallis will be aided in his pursuit by the arrival of fresh troops under the command of General Alexander Leslie. Originally sent to raid the Chesapeake region, Cornwallis had called them south to South Carolina several weeks earlier to bolster his force. But the pursuit does not start well. Poor intel on where Morgan's men were and which direction they were heading led Cornwallis to fall behind his opponent almost immediately. By January 23rd, Cornwallis has to stop at Ramseur's Mill for a few days, where he will burn his excess baggage and wagons. He had lost most of his light troops at the battles of Kings Mountain and Cowpens and must make extreme measures to give his army a chance of keeping pace with the Americans. In addition, he is going to choose to accept the gamble of detaching from his supply lines. He must hope that during the campaign through North Carolina, he can feed his men off the countryside. In order to try and give his men a new supply point to reach, he also orders a battalion of troops sent via ship to Wilmington, North Carolina. Their goal will be to extend a supply line up the Cape Fear River into central North Carolina in the Loyalist region of Cross Creek, modern-day Fayetteville. At the end of January 1781, Cornwallis is stopped at the Catawba River, with Morgan's men on the other side protected by high water caused by an unusually rainy winter. General Greene has met General Morgan near Cowan's Ford to plan where and how they will reunite the army. On February 1st, Cornwallis forces a crossing of the Catawba River and disperses the American rearguard, only to get stopped at the next major river, the Yadkin, a few days later. The American army has benefited from advanced scouting by General Greene's staff, who have identified fording locations and procured all the boats needed to move the men. This advanced planning will help the Americans stay ahead of their pursuers time and time again in the weeks that follow. General Cornwallis takes his army on a 10-mile detour to the north to cross the river at Shallow Ford. At the same time, Greene's army has finally reunited its pieces at Guilford Courthouse. By February 9th, Greene holds a council of war at Guilford Courthouse to decide whether to keep maneuvering or finally turn and fight. And his subordinates overwhelmingly vote to keep maneuvering until they can achieve a clear advantage. On February 10th, the race to the Dan begins when Cornwallis restarts his pursuit. The British army is a few miles away from Greene, near Bethania and Salem, and here he is again led astray by faulty information. Local citizens inform him that Greene's army has not reunited yet, and that if he is heading for Virginia, he could only cross the Dan River near Dix's Ferry, which is directly north of Cornwallis. So Cornwallis first goes in the wrong direction, southeast, hoping to intercept what he thinks is a portion of Greene's army that is still isolated. When he realizes this is not the case, he then moves in the wrong direction, heading north towards what he thinks is the only site Greene can use to cross the Dan River. When he finally realizes that Greene's army is heading northeast, he is again deceived by Greene's flying column, a body of 700 selected soldiers and cavalry who are deliberately sent to lure Cornwallis away from the main body of the American army. All of these mistakes and deceptions led to General Greene escaping into Virginia by February 15th. Much like Cornwallis was stopped by the Delaware River when he pursued George Washington through New Jersey back in 1776, he again finds himself on the wrong side of a large river with the Americans holding all the boats. Cornwallis leads his men south to Hillsborough. Here he attempts to raise Loyalist troops, but is once again disappointed when scores of citizens come into his camp, express joy that the British army have finally arrived, but do not contribute any supplies or manpower to his army. On February 24th, any hope of recruiting Loyalists receives a final blow. General Greene sent Light Horse Harry Lee back into North Carolina to keep track of Cornwallis and harass his forces so he can't operate unopposed. Aided by men under General Andrew Pickens, they ambush a large force of Loyalists who are trying to reach General Cornwallis's army. In what is called Pyles Massacre or Pyles' Defeat, the rebels deceived, then attacked Loyalists who mistook them for Banastre Tarleton's British Legion that had also been sent to escort them into camp. Cornwallis begins to move again once he has learned General Greene has moved his army back into North Carolina. In the early days of March, the two armies will skirmish several times, but Cornwallis never gets the Americans to commit to a battle. By March 13th, both armies are approximately 12 miles away from Guilford Courthouse. The American army has recently received a large amount of reinforcements, bringing their troop strength to over 4,000. Most of these men are militia, so General Greene is now eager to fight the British and use his numerical advantage before that advantage disappears when the militiamen go back home. The British army has slowly been worn down by this campaign. With daily skirmishes, terrible weather, men dying to disease, Cornwallis has just over 2,000 men and runs out of food for all of his soldiers on March 14th. Cornwallis must decide what to do. Should he keep trying to force a battle with the elusive rebels, hoping he can destroy them the way he destroyed the American army at the Battle of Camden? Or does he head for the nearest supply point and reassess his strategy? On March 15th, 1781, Cornwallis and Greene both choose to fight.